How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, June 28th, 2021, for this episode of The Elite. I'm James Sims, and for this episode, I'm going to do an individual profile on Kevin De Bruyne, the elite Belgian center attacking midfielder for Manchester City, turns 30 today. And for this segment, I'm going to go through his accolades and achievements and his accomplishments ever since he's been in the global spotlight up until this very moment, just to give a sense of context and a little bit of understanding as to why many people regard him as one of the best soccer players on the planet and why I have him listed as one of the elite soccer players for the 2021 calendar year. If you're unfamiliar with him, he stands at about 5'11". He is a very great passer of the football, of course, great dribbler, great defender, very physical guy. But I just think the thing that really sets him apart is his passing. He does have great vision, and he does have rare 1 in a million skill. That is the reason why he's out there. He has amazing consistency. He doesn't really have bad games. And usually whenever his team scores, he's somehow a part of it, even if he just draws the pressure of the defense off of the play and it allows his team to score. You know what I'm saying? He's that good. So he's originally from Drongen, Belgium. He would come up through the Genk team or the Genk youth system. Genk is one of the best soccer teams in all of Belgium, and he would eventually get his call up for Genk in his age 17 season in 2018 in 2019, when he was a lad basically before he was even on the national team. In 2008-2009, in his age 17 season, when he would get called up to play maybe 2 matches for maybe a combined 18 minutes. But of course, he was a very young debutant, and many people in Belgium were starting to take note of this kid who probably should have been in school somewhere but somehow found his way on this team. And also in 2009, in that season he would go on to win the Belgian Cup. So of course that went on to happen in his career very early on. In 2009-2010, in his very second season with Genk, he would start 17 of the 31 matches he would play in a season where Genk finished 7th in the Belgian Pro League. He would finish with a couple of goals and 3 assists himself, finally making the scoreboard as a young teenager. And following the 2009-2010 season, Belgium would play they would play internationally. I don't know if they necessarily were... they did not play at the 2010 World Cup, but following the 2010 World Cup that August, Kevin De Bruyne would get called up to the Belgian national team as a young player following his very first 2 years in the league as virtually a teenager, and Kevin De Bruyne has been a member of the Belgian national team for the last 11 seasons. So, following the 2010 summer, he would come back to Genk for what would be his 3rd season in the Belgian Pro League. He would start 30 of his 32 matches in a season where Genk would actually end up winning the Pro League. That would be the very first league title that would go in his trophy case. So, of course, especially for him to do it in Belgium was a very big feat. Like I said, he finished with 5 goals and 11 assists in the season for Genk on the year. And following that year, he would help them qualify for Champions League for the only time that he would be there. Following his age 19 season, he will come back in 2011-2012 for his age 20 season, his 4th season at the senior circuit with Genk, the best team in Belgium. And in his very final season, as he was garnering continental attention, he started 27 of the 28 matches he would play in a season where Genk would finish 3rd in the Pro League. Specifically in Belgium, he would finish with 11 assists, just as many as he did in his age 19 season, and he would end up finishing with 8 goals on the season. And of course, going into Champions League. He wouldn't finish with a goal or an assist, and they would end up losing in the group stage. But Kevin De Bruyne was able to get some of those matches in to show that, or to at least give Genk at least a fighting chance going into that. And following that summer, Kevin De Bruyne would eventually get scooped up by Werder Bremen, so he would get signed by the Chelsea club, and he would only end up playing 3 games for Chelsea before he got loaned out to Werder Bremen. So he would pick up his 4th season in the Bundesliga, where he would start all 33 of the matches he would play, and in his very first season in the Bundesliga, he would finish with 10 goals and 9 assists on the season, and in his age 21 season. In a Werder Bremen season that would result in them finishing with the 14th best team and 14th best record in the entire league. But it still kept them from being relegated, and Kevin De Bruyne finally on the stage at one of the top 5 leagues was showing his talent, and many people would not forget how impactful he would be following that. After his season at Werder Bremen, he would play 3 games at Chelsea in 2013-2014 in his age 22 season, getting an assist before he would eventually get loaned out to Wolfsburg for the remainder of the season. He would end up starting all 16 of the matches he played in the second half of the season, in a season where Wolfsburg finished with the 5th best record in all of the Bundesliga. He had 3 goals and 6 assists for the second half, and of course at Wolfsburg, he was starting to settle into a bit of a position for himself, but he was still not as known as the other players, especially. But following that, he would compete with Belgium at the 2014 World Cup, and in the 2014 World Cup, they would advance past the group stage after beating Algeria, Russia, and South Korea. In their round of 16 matchup, they would beat the United States, as Kevin De Bruyne would score the first goal in the 93rd minute, and then Lukaku's goal in the second would be enough for them to just squeak past the United States. And then they would end up losing to Argentina in the quarterfinal, before Argentina would end up losing to Germany, I believe, and that was the World Cup that Germany won. But of course, that was the first World Cup the World Cup that Kevin De Bruyne played at, because Kevin De Bruyne was promoted to the international team just following the 2010 World Cup, the World Cup in which Belgium didn't even really compete. So following the 2014 World Cup, a World Cup in which he scored a very crucial goal in a big game, I think that was a big boost for his ego. He would come back to Wolfsburg for his very only full season at Wolfsburg. He would play all 34 games in a season where they would finish with the 2nd best record in the Bundesliga. He would finish with 10 goals and 20 assists, and when he finished with those 20 assists, he had set the Bundesliga record for assists in a season. And when he had done that, that was when Kevin De Bruyne had really become big time. And that year they were in Europa League. They lost in the quarterfinals that year. He finished with 5 goals and an assist in 11 of those games. So Kevin De Bruyne for Wolfsburg was starting he was definitely making a name for himself, even though he wasn't playing on one of the top clubs. He would also go down to be recognized as the Bundesliga Footballer of the Year for the 2015 season, to just add on to just the list of accolades for just how good he was. And following the World Cup and his solo full season at Wolfsburg, in his age 24 season in 2015-2016, he would only play 2 games at Wolfsburg before he would eventually get signed and picked up by Manchester City in 2015-2016. He got signed for a club record fee of £55 million. He was the most expensive transfer in British football history after Angel Di Maria in 2014, just to give a little bit of context. But once Kevin De Bruyne was signed by Manchester City, of course, he would prove to show that they made the right choice in signing him. Finishing out his age 24 season, he would start 22 of the 25 matches he would play in a Manchester City season in which they finished with the fourth best record in the Premier League. The one trophy they did take away, they took home the Football League Cup final, and of course Kevin De Bruyne was a very integral part of that. And in Champions League, he would start 8 of 10 matches, finishing with 3 goals. That's actually the most goals he's ever scored in a Champions League tournament, but he was able to do so with Manchester City. And following that season in 2016, he would go on to compete for Belgium for the Euros. And in the Euros, they would finish second in their group stage as they tied roughly with Italy in that regard. They lost in their matchup to Italy. But once they made it through knockouts, they would end up beating Hungary in the round of 16, and they would end up losing to Wales in the quarterfinals. So following the 2016 Euros, Kevin De Bruyne would come back to Manchester City for his very first full season there in 2016 and 17, his age 25 season. And in that season, he would start 33 of the 36 matchups he would play, in a season in which Manchester City would go on to finish with the third best record in the Premier League. They would not finish with the trophy as in Champions League, they would finish in the round of 16 rather than the semifinals the year before. And this was another year in which Sergio Aguero would lead the team in scoring. In Kevin De Bruyne's first full Premier League season, he would finish with 6 goals and 17 assists. Up until that point, that was the most assists that he had ever put up in a Premier League season. And of course, 17 is a lot to put up, especially playing on a big club like Manchester City. Even though they finished third, they were finishing a lot better. So, of course, he was helping the team get better from that regard. In Champions League, even though they lost in the round of 16, he'd still finish with a goal and an assist in that effort as well. Following his age 25 season, he would come back to Manchester City for his second full season, his age 26 season in 2017-2018. And of course, under Pep Guardiola, they would make new moves to bring in new players. And in this season, he would start 36 of the 37 matchups in a season where Manchester City would go on to win the Premier League for the first time since De Bruyne got there and for the first time since 2014. But with Kevin De Bruyne, and also with him there, they would go on to win the EFL Cup final for the second time since Kevin De Bruyne was there. But first, starting off in the Premier League, he would finish with 8 goals and 16 assists. The combined 24 is just roughly what he was doing the other years. That's the most combined that he was able to put up in a Premier League season, at least up until that point. And once they made it into Champions League, they would end up losing in quarterfinals, but De Bruyne would finish with a goal and 4 assists. So, of course, showing that it wasn't a fluke what he was doing in Germany, and it wasn't a fluke like what he was doing in the Premier League. He did the same thing that he was doing the previous year, but they had a better team, which resulted in them actually breaking through and actually winning the Premier League. Following his first Premier League title, of course, he now had a championship in 2 different leagues in 2 different countries, holding on to the Belgian title in Genk in 2011 and in 2018. Following that season, he would compete with Belgium at their most recent FIFA World Cup appearance, which would result in them finishing in 3rd place. They would finish at the top of their table after beating England, Tunisia, and Panama in the very first group stage matchups. They would beat Japan in the round of 16, 3-2. They would end up beating Brazil 2-1 in the quarterfinal as their second goal of the game winning, the goal that got them over Brazil, came from Kevin De Bruyne in the 31st minute. They would lose to France in the semifinal 1-0, but they would end up beating England 2-0 in the 3rd place playoff, the team that they ended up beating in the in their own group stage. So that's how they were able to finish with a medal in 2018 regardless. Following the 2018 season, Kevin De Bruyne would come back to Manchester City for his third full season, but this would be a season that would be plagued with injury. In 2018-19, he actually suffered a knee injury during the training session in August, early in the season, but he would come back later in the year. But for the segment of the year that he would play, he would start 11 of 19 games in a season where Manchester City would repeat as the Premier League champs. For the first time since he was there, they would win the FA Cup final. They would win the EFL Cup final for the third time since he had been there as well. So of course that was very huge, and that's the third time that he had won that trophy in his 4 years there. And he had won the Community Shield for the first time since he had been there too. So, of course, that was a very big trophy season. And Kevin De Bruyne was able to be a very big part of it. He finished with 2 goals and 2 assists in the 19 games he played in the Premier League. Looking at the Champions League, where they finished in the quarterfinal, we finished with 4 assists as well. Following the 2018-2019 season, he would come back for the 2019-2020 season in 2018, a season that was heavily impacted by COVID, where it kind of halted the end of the season. A season that was virtually called off at the very end, but while they were playing it, it wasn't called at that point. But in his age 28 season in 2019-2020 he would start 32 of the 35 games he would play in a season where Manchester City finished runner-up to Liverpool in the Premier League. He would finish with 13 goals and 20 assists over the entirety of the season. The combined scoring players are the most he's ever put together, and more than he did in his Wolfsburg season when he set the assist record in the Bundesliga. So, of course, Kevin De Bruyne continuing to show what he was able to do on a masterclass level, doing all of this in a season where he was able to take home the EFL Cup final for the 4th time in his tenure there, for the 3rd season in a row, and he was able to take home the Community Shield for the 2nd time, as Manchester City lost in the quarterfinals of Champions League, to give a little bit more context. And then following 2019-20, he was supposed to compete for the Euros of 2020, but those got moved back to this summer, and he's competing in them right now. But also looking at following the 2019-2020 season, this leads us through the most recent season that Kevin De Bruyne was able to play, his age 29 season in 2019-2020, which up until this moment is his 5th full season with Manchester City, his 6th season with the club. And he's played as many games this season as he did his very first season when he moved to Man City from Wolfsburg. He would start 23 of the 25 games this season, in a season where Manchester City would go on to win the Premier League title for the 3rd time in the last 4 seasons, of course, with Kevin De Bruyne leading the way. And this was a season in which Kevin De Bruyne had to deal with more injuries, but after he collided with he collided with someone in the Champions League final as well. But I digress. But following this season, or in this season, they would also go on to win the EFL Cup final for the 4th season in a row, for the 5th time in the last 6 seasons since Kevin De Bruyne has been there. And not to mention this season in the Premier League, he finished with 6 goals and 12 assists, finishing near the top of the Premier League in assists. And in Champions League, he finished with 3 goals and 4 assists while helping Manchester City make it all the way to the final in a Champions League tournament in which they would lose to Chelsea in the final. And that currently leads us to where we are, where he's playing currently for Belgium in the Euro 2020 tournament, as they were able to sweep their entire competition in the first round. And they came off of their first win against Portugal in the round of 16, and they're going to face off against Italy in the quarterfinals. Right now, that is where Kevin De Bruyne is as of today. And as of today, Kevin De Bruyne is now 30 years old. He has shown no signs of showing down, but rather signs of the opposite, that he might be getting even better. And even just the prospect of that, just the possibility of that, just makes watching him even that much more exciting. And with that said, I want to thank Bleacher Report. I want to thank Wikipedia. I want to thank Transfermarkt. I want to thank Football Reference for all the stats and figures that I needed to do this episode. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 20 minutes of this piece. If you ever get a chance to check out Kevin De Bruyne, he wears number 17 for Manchester City at the moment. He wears number 7 for Belgium, if I'm not confused. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to watch him, because there's always a good chance that something good will happen whenever Kevin De Bruyne plays. And the goal is that between now and his next birthday, he has more for me to talk about. And with that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to this piece. I hope all is well, and I will catch you with another segment following this one. Thanks for listening to this piece once again, and peace out. I will catch you all tomorrow once all of today's episodes are done. And don't forget to be elite, and peace out, y'all.